Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu, and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be talking about the yellow deck of ShineGraymon Tamers. So obviously in the name, the deck is focused around ShineGraymon and running a couple of different Tamers to further utilize ShineGraymon's effect and his interaction with Tamer cards. So this deck is definitely pretty interesting because it plays a little bit differently than some of the other Digimon decks, and I'll get into why as I'm talking about the cards individually. So first up, we're going to start with the Digitama. I'm going to be running 4 copies of Kyupimon because currently Kyupimon is just one of the better yellow Digitamas in the game. And then as my 5th Digitama, I'm going to be running 1 copy of Nyaromon because Nyaromon has some synergy with one of our yellow Tamers. Next, on to the rookies. I'm going to be running 4 copies of Patamon because Patamon has this great when played effect where we get to check the top 4 cards of our deck and then add all yellow Tamers among them into our hand, and then the rest go on the bottom. So we're not really going to want to digivolve into Patamon, but Patamon is great as is for its when played effect. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Labramon because Labramon, even though he doesn't have any innate skills of his own, he is a great base for some of our evolutions. He has this really good inheritable ability where if an opponent's Digimon would be destroyed by having its DP reduced to 0 during your turn, you get to draw a card. Obviously, there's plenty of ways of reducing the opponent's Digimon's DP down. And then the last rookie that I'm going to be running is 4 copies of Agumon. Agumon is in there for the similar reason that Labramon is in there, where it's good to act as a base to start evolving with. And its inheritable ability is when you're attacking, if you have 3 or more yellow Tamers, you get to draw a card. And obviously, drawing a card is very good in yellow because the whole idea of yellow is to try to out-resource your opponent. Next, on to the champions. I'm going to be running 3 copies of Seasarmon. So Seasarmon is pretty interesting because we don't necessarily want to digivolve past Seasarmon most of the time, because we want to try to utilize that jamming ability, because jamming allows him to safely attack the security with very little repercussions. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of GeoGreymon because he is the next stage in the evolution line for ShineGraymon, and he has this great inheritable ability of when you're attacking, if you have 3 or more yellow Tamers, one of your opponent's Digimon gets minus 2000 DP. That's just a overall solid ability, whether you pair it up with Labramon or Agumon. It doesn't necessarily matter because they both work very similarly to each other. And then lastly, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Unimon. Unimon is in there just because he's a blocker. Next, on to the ultimates, I'm going to be running 3 copies of MagnaAngemon. So MagnaAngemon is pretty interesting because of his when played effect, which incentivizes us not to use him to digivolve with. We are able to digivolve with him, but it's not recommended because of this when played. And his when played is pretty powerful, on which we recover 1, so we get to basically heal one of our securities. And he also has an inheritable ability during your turn. For every 3 security you have, your Digimon gets plus 1000 DP. He kind of acts as a little good quick base to go into a slightly faster ShineGraymon, rather than trying to build all the way up from a rookie to a Mega. He just is a good base to start to digivolve into a Mega for a fast ShineGraymon. Similarly to MagnaAngemon, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Mistymon because same reasons. He has a pretty good when played effect, and he acts as a quicker base to ShineGraymon. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 4 copies of RizeGreymon. So obviously, RizeGreymon is the next stage in the Agumon Digivolution tree, so it only makes sense to run him. And he has this great when digivolved effect, where you basically get to put a yellow Tamer from your hand into play for free. And if you do that, you don't get its when played effect. The majority of them don't necessarily have a when played effect, so that doesn't really matter most of the time. It could, but there's a lot of targets where it doesn't. and then he even has a decent inheritable ability where if you have 3 or more yellow Tamers, you get security attack +1. So obviously he is the primary target to digivolve into and digivolve with for your ultimate. Next is the Megas, and I am obviously running only 4 copies of ShineGraymon. So ShineGraymon is the key pinnacle to the deck. He has this really powerful when digivolved effect where you get to rest all of your yellow Tamers, and for each yellow Tamer you rested using his effect, one of your opponent's Digimon gets minus 4,000 DP until the end of the turn. This could potentially completely wipe the opponent's board, or you could stack it onto one Digimon to kill off one really powerful Digimon. There's just a lot of utility in just his when digivolved effect, on top of which, during your turn, this Digimon gets a plus 1,000 DP for every Tamer you have. So he will get stronger for every Tamer you have, on top of any other buffs that is also going with him from his Digivolution sources. Next, on to the options. I'm going to be running 1 copy of Eden's Javelin. Eden's Javelin is in here just as some more additional removal, so it can trigger in the security, which is pretty good, and its effect is just pretty solid overall. So what it does is you get to draw 1, and then you get to choose one of your opponent's Digimon, and it gets minus 1,000 DP for every card in your hand until the end of the turn. Yellow tends to play this resource game where it wants to try to draw a lot and have a healthy hand size, so this just goes into playing along with that strategy for some additional removal. Next, I'm going to be playing 4 copies of Glorious Burst, because Glorious Burst is just a really solid card if we have a lot of Tamers out. So what it does is the cost of this card is reduced by 1 for every yellow Tamer on our field. So this card could potentially cost almost nothing at all, or if you design your deck around it, you could have it actually cost nothing. But regardless, you're going to definitely be playing it for a lot cheaper than its initial cost, and what it does is one of your opponent's Digimon gets minus 12,000 DP until the end of the turn. So it's just acting as some very solid hard removal. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any security ability. That's the only big downside to it, but outside of that, it's a really solid removal option. And then as the last option card of the deck, I'm going to be running 1 copy of Strike of the 7 Stars. This is just in there for more removal. It also is pretty good because it can trigger in the security, and all it really does is minuses one of the opponent's Digimon by 10,000 DP for the turn. Next, on to the Tamers. So I'm going to be running 3 copies of TK. TK is the memory fixing Tamer of the deck, so if we have less than 2 memory, our memory becomes 3. That's pretty good already, and then he has this amazing when played effect, where we basically get to check the cards in our security, reveal it. If it's yellow, we get to add it to our hand, and then we get to recover 1. So it is basically a little bit better than just drawing a card, because we get to pick which card we want to add to our hand. Next, I'm playing 2 copies of Kairi. So Kairi is pretty good because obviously it's another yellow Tamer, and then it also has this pretty solid ability where at the start of your turn, if your security is 3 or less, you get memory +1. This ability does stack, so if you have multiple Kairis out, you'll get multiple instances of that +1 memory, but this is the least likely Tamer to actually get its ability off because, obviously, being in yellow, we don't want to be at a low security. That's the only reason why this Tamer is in a lower quantity than the others, because the effect might not trigger. And then the last Tamer that I'm going to be running is going to be 3 copies of the starter deck TK, because during the opponent's turn, all security Digimon get plus 2,000. That's pretty decent on the defense side because it allows our Digimon that are in the security to trade up into our opponent's Digimon a little bit more effectively. And then obviously all of these Tamers have the security effect that they can be played for free when they're hit in the security, and because they are all Tamers, they interact nicely with our ShineGraymon. Now, I do have some other cards you could possibly think about running or splashing into the deck. So if you wanted, you could run a little bit of red because red has some additional tamer searching. So you have the red Agumon, which has a when played effect. You could reveal the top 5 cards of your deck and then add 1 tamer among them to your hand and the rest go on the bottom. This effect is not color locked, so you could pick your yellow tamer if you want off of splashing in this Agumon. And then obviously, if you're going to be splashing red, you could play Cordramon because Cordramon is also just another generically decent red card to splash in. It has the blocker mechanic, so that way you could use it to kind of start to try to wall out the opponent. Or if you want to skip all that, you could run ShineGraymon to just destroy one of the opponent's Digimon with blocker to try to get their blockers out, so that way you could use your other minus effects on Digimon that are more threatening than a blocker. And similarly to ShineGraymon, you could play Gallantmon in the same way, where you could use ShineGraymon as the base for his when played, and then just play Gallantmon on top of him for his Digivolution cost. Then he has a really powerful Digivolution that interacts with red tamers, so you could use a little bit of red tamers. And basically what the card is doing is when you Digivolve into him, if you have a red tamer, destroy one of your opponent's Digimon with 6000 DP or less, you could set their Digimon to 6000 DP with the debuff, so you do have a little bit of interaction there. And then he also has a great when attacking ability. For every 10 cards in the opponent's trash, you discard one of their security. So it's not destroying, it's discarding it, so they don't get the security check off of it. And it's just a very powerful card, and like I said, it just has some tamer interaction, so you could possibly think about running a red tamer along with him. As far as some splashable red option cards, because if you are adopting this red package to play along with the deck, Shield of the Just is pretty good, because you could destroy one of your opponent's Digimon with 5000 DP or less, and if we have a red tamer on the field, then we get to destroy one of the opponent's Digimon with 8000 DP or less instead. And again, we could use a lot of the yellow effects to reduce the DP of the opponent's Digimon, so that way we can potentially kill something even greater. And then obviously if you're splashing in red options, Terra Force is just great because it's just flat out removal. It just destroys one of your opponent's Digimon. And then, obviously, the best red tamer that we could splash with is going to be the starter deck Tai, because he has a very low cost, and he has a very decent stackable ability, where all of our Digimon during our turn get plus 1000 DP for a little bit of extra aggression. As far as some other yellow cards you could splash, you could play Kyupimon, because he has a pretty solid when attacking effect, where if you have 4 or less cards in your hand, you get to draw 1. Obviously, drawing is pretty good, and it's a lot of what yellow wants to try to do, so he is just another good option that you could be running as a yellow rookie. If you want to try to digivolve more into ShineGraymon rather than play the when played ultimates, Angemon is pretty solid, because when we digivolve, if our security is 3 or less, we get to recover 1. So it's kind of doing something similar to what MagnaAngemon is doing, just it's when digivolved with a restriction rather than just a when played. And then as an alternate mega for the deck, you could run Seraphimon, because he has this great when attacking ability, where one of your opponent's Digimon gets minus 4000 DP for the turn. So it's not quite as strong as ShineGraymon's, but it is recurring as long as you can keep attacking, and depending on how you build your deck, he makes for a great assistant mega to ShineGraymon. So that's kind of it for the deck. It is definitely a pretty fun and powerful deck. It definitely is a little bit different to play than some of the other decks, just because there are certain Digimon you don't want to digivolve from, and then you can use some of your ultimates as bases to go into ShineGraymon. So it definitely has a lot of options in terms of how you can play it. This is just, again, my interpretation on how I feel like it should be played, but there's definitely lots of options open to, on top of which you have definitely a lot of good splashable options too. That's kind of it for this video. As always, I'll have the deck list in the description below. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or concerns about the deck or just want to leave a comment in general. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content, and I will see you in the next video.